All right, so today we're gonna talk about basically like planning planning development. So uh, the typical way that things are going to work once you have a job as a software engineer is that you'll be on a team. You might be in a big company or small company, but you'll be on a team, and the typical workflow is going to be something called agile. Has anyone heard of agile? Matt, you're nodding your head. Can you tell me what you know about agile?
Sorry, I've heard of it, but I don't know
Oh,
anything
okay.
about it. Really, I've just seen it in like job postings.
Yeah.
Is it just like the ability to move quickly?
Yeah, I mean that's the reason for it. Yeah. So
So,
the idea is that you have very fast iteration cycles. So instead of, let's say, we want to develop a huge application like, Facebook or something, rather than saying, we're going to take a year and we're going to make Facebook, and then we're going to like release Facebook to the world, after a year. We're going to develop for a year and test everything and make sure everything works, and then we're just going to release it, and then we're going to have Facebook out in the real world. The way basically everyone does it now is you develop some version of Facebook which like works well enough and has enough features, and then you release it and people use it, and then you're constantly like, you know on a regular basis you're making updates and creating releases. So I don't know what the release cycle at Facebook is, but they probably release like 100 times a day. They're constantly like making little bug fixes and updates and adding features and stuff like that. um, yeah, and depending on where you work, your release cycle might be, every week or every couple weeks or every month or several times a day. um, but the idea is that you're constantly like making small iterations rather than huge big changes that take a long time. And the kind of format for that, as someone working on a team, is going to be basically 2 week cycles. You basically have 2 week cycles called sprints. um, and what happens is you have different planning meetings where you say, okay, in the next, for the next quarter we want to have XYZ features developed. And so you take those goals, which are sometimes called epics, and you break them down into smaller units called stories. And a story is the like unit of work for an individual developer. So you'll get something like create Facebook, and then that will be broken down into different epics, something like, create the data model for Facebook, and then create the data model will be broken into, you know uh, set up a pipeline, create the database, run the migrations, blah 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 blah. So all these different other smaller substeps that need to happen. And so an individual developer will get one of those small chunks of work called the story. And stories can vary in complexity and time, but generally you want to not have anything take longer than 2 weeks. So if you have a chunk of work, generally people target like a few days or maybe a week at the most. So if something's going to take you longer than a week, it probably needs to be broken down further into a smaller unit of work. So you'll get a bunch of stories, and then you'll get assigned stories, and you'll have to work on them. And the stories you get assigned, the challenges that we give you are usually pretty explicit and detailed. Like, you have to do this. You have to do, we give you generally pretty precise instructions. You may not feel like they're pretty precise, but once you start working, you'll realize how precise they actually are. In the real world, your stories are often going to be very vague. It depends on where you work. Some places are better uh, about being detailed, And some places are just like, well, this thing doesn't work and we think it's broken, but we're not sure, or something like that. And your job will be to not most, but a lot of what you'll do is figuring out what the actual problem is. So it's not like write me an algorithm that does XYZ. It's going to be, you first have to figure out like what is the actual problem here? What do I need to solve this problem? And oftentimes as you go through that process, you'll realize that the requirements are actually different than what you initially expected. And when you do that, you also need to make sure that you're planning things out, because if you just take some instruction or take a story or a set of requirements and just start writing code immediately, that's almost always going to end badly. So we're going to kind of model that for the lecture. So I created a Trello board here. If anyone has ever used Trello, this is one tool, one type of tool that you can use to plan things out. So I just used a template here. So this is a typical kind of thing. You have a backlog. This is a bunch of things that need to get done at some point, but no one's actually actively working on them. You can ignore the design. And then to do, these are things that like need to get done in this sprint, for example. And then, so here's a task here. So we'll look at this in a second. And then as you work on things, you'll kind of move your task down the line from, okay, started working on it. And then, okay, I'm done, or I think I'm done, and I submit a PR. But when you submit a PR, people are gonna do a code review, kind of like I did with the assessments, where people are gonna make comments and say, I don't think we should do this, or did you think about this other edge case or whatever? So there's usually some kind of iterative feedback loop where you'll have an initial solution, and then you'll get comments, and then you'll create another, you'll address those comments, submit a new PR, etc. Once it gets approved, then there'll be some kind of testing process. So your changes will probably go into some kind of like development or staging environment where they'll be tested. And once everything in that staging environment is good, then you'll create a release, and then whatever changes you have will go live into the production application. So this is a typical life cycle that you'll just do this over and over as a developer. All right, so let's take a look at the task. So we're going to say that we've been assigned this story, and it's called Travel Package App. So we can look at it, and there's a description here. So the description is write a class that gets a user's budget. So just for context, we're going to pretend that you're working at Priceline or something. Maybe this is Priceline when they were a startup. So we need to write a class that gets a user's budget, gets a user's destination based on their budget, and displays a confirmation message to the user. And there's a note here. It says we need to coordinate. Well, we'll actually coordinate with Matt. We'll coordinate with Matt on the data team. So we have a pretty, a pretty reasonable amount of information to get started, but we can't just start coding, right? We have to figure out really what the problem is and how we're gonna solve it. It looks like there's some stuff we don't know that we need to figure out before we get started. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send a message to Matt. I'm gonna go on the Foxtrot channel here. So this is something that you'll often need to do when you're working. Software engineering is, it can be, lonely work, but there's a lot of teamwork and coordination and, I need to get information from so-and-so, or so-and-so, I need to get permissions from so-and-so, or I need to talk to the DevOps team to set up this environment or whatever. So in this case, we'll do hi Matt. Working on the travel app story. Can you please send over some example data? So hopefully Matt's in today. We'll see. Okay, cool. So he sent me this. Okay, cool. So I have the data. So I'm not really sure what this is yet or how I'm going to use it, but it looks like it's in CSV format. So can anyone tell me about CSV format?
Stands for comma separated values. They're usually data separated by commas.
Okay, cool. And what kind of data do you typically get in a CSV file?
Objects.
Could be, yeah. Yeah. How is it structured? I mean, so at some level, CSV is just, lines and then stuff. There's a bunch of commas in it, but
Usually there's like a header, like kind of like an Excel, and
okay.
so
Yeah.
and then the values for that category are below or to the right of it, depending.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So it's tabular data. So it represents a table. So there's a matrix, and then there are columns and rows. So the first row, so you don't always have headers in CSV files, but you often do. In this case, we do. So these are the column names, and then so the first value after the first one is going to be a country, and the next thing is a cost. So all of these are costs. So we have rows, sometimes called records, sometimes called tuples. That's where tuple comes from. So we have a bunch of associated data, right? So that's a CSV format. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to create a repo. So this is just a function that I have that will create. Huh, interesting. So you can customize your bash profile to do stuff like, so common things like I want to create a folder and then open it in VS Code. So I just wrote a shortcut to do that. I can show that real quick just for the. So I'm not sure why I got this. Interesting. Anyway, so I'm gonna cd and then so here is my bash profile, which you guys have. It should look similar to this, but probably different. Actually, I think you guys are using Zish now, but same basic idea. So here is a custom function basically that I wrote, and this is what it does. So when I type in mo into the terminal, it does this custom behavior. So it's going to create a directory. Does anyone have any idea what $1 is?
It looks like it's just take it, it's your input,
Yeah.
whatever you type in.
Yeah, exactly. So So what's the command that I typed in? I did mo and then travel app, and then it opened this thing called travel app. So $1 is the bash. Oops. Why my things being all wonky, but it's the it basically just it's a reference to the first argument that you passed to the script. So $1 means the first argument that you passed. So it's gonna mkdir whatever I pass in as the first argument, which in this case was travel app. And then it's also going to do what is double ampersand?
And
Yeah. So this basically means, so what kind of expression is this? So in JavaScript, we actually have something very similar. So node, you can do true, it's true, and false. So true and false is false. What is true and true? True. What about false and true? So this is basically a conditional expression. So it's gonna evaluate this, and then it's gonna basically say if this is true, then execute this next thing. So in Bash, it's the same idea. So this is basically just gonna make sure that if this is successful, so everything, everything in Python, if you write a function in Python, it will return something. In Python, if you don't have an explicit return value, it will return none. In JavaScript, if you don't give it an explicit return value, it returns what?
undefined.
Yeah. And in, Bash world, and also in, like, for example, C, functions have to return something. So the main function you use will usually return a number, and 0 will indicate that there was not an error, and something that's not 0 will indicate some kind of error. So we're basically making sure that this exits without an error. If it does, then we're going to execute the rest of this. So we're going to create a directory. If that doesn't fail, we're going to cd into that directory. And if that doesn't fail, we're going to open VS Code in that directory. So that's what that's doing right there. All right, let's get back to the travel app. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy this in. And I'm going to call this planning.txt. So here's my task so far, and I'm going to grab that data. Where's that? Right here. And I'm going to include that right there. All right. So we have a basic idea of what we need to do. Now we should just start writing code, right? We should go start writing a class and then take it from there, because we got to get this stuff quick, right?
Should
No, we
probably
should-
see the code first.
Yeah. So we should think about what we're going to do. So how are we going to organize this? So first, what data do we need? So we have to,
User budget.
okay, so we have to write a class. So what data does that class need to have? It's going to have a user's budget. So user budget.
It's gonna need the cost from the data.
Okay, so yeah, so it's going to need the destination cost.
and the country.
Okay, yeah, so we'll just do. Okay. We need any other data?
User's destination.
Okay, yeah, so the destination that the user wants to go to, right? So user destination. Okay. All right. Okay. So we have some idea for the data we need. Now, what about the methods that we're gonna need?
Get the user's budget.
Okay. So we'll do something like get. Let me do uh, so get user budget. Okay.
You need to find out which destinations they can afford.
Okay. Yeah. So get possible destinations based on budget.
And then just display those. or
Okay.
print.
Okay. So display information message. Anything else?
They're going to need to choose a destination as well somehow.
Okay. Yep. So get user destination. What about this stuff?
You're going to need to put that data into a usable format.
Yeah. So we're gonna need to, let's say, read source data. Okay. So let's say we'll say that's good enough for now. We have a general idea of what we want to do. We could think about this more. We could try to come up with some detail about what we might need to do all these things. But let's just say that this is good enough as a start. All right. So I'm going to save this and then I'm going to open this to the right so I can look at it while I'm developing. And let's do here. And I'm going to create a class. Class travel app. All right. So I'm gonna basically stub out these methods. So we know we're probably gonna have to have these methods. So I'm just gonna go ahead and stub them out now. I don't know what they're gonna do yet. So def times this one All right. All right, so we have these stubbed out. What about the data? What do we do with this stuff?
That'll be, you'll make the init function and put that stuff in it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's definitely a good thing to do starting up. So def init. So we'll see, we'll think about this more in a second, but so self dot user budget equals something, we're not sure. Let's just say this is going to be an integer. So I'll just default it to 0 for now. So self dot the country cost data. What should this be? Do you think? What data type should this be?
An object
Okay.
or a list. Actually,
Okay. Yeah. So we have a few options here. So let's think about what shape we want this data to be in. So we have a bunch of rows of stuff.
Would a dictionary make sense?
Okay. So what would the structure of the dictionary look like?
The country would be the key. And then the cost would be the value.
Okay. So I have country France, cost 1,500. Is this? But we have more than one country, right?
Yeah, I meant like France. It would be like France and then the cost.
I see.
100.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so we could do it that way, where each key is a country name, and then each value is a cost. What if hypothetically we had another field here? So country cost, I don't know, language. So what if we had to count for more complex source data?
Maybe a list of this.
Okay, we could do a list of lists. So if we did something like France 1,500, and then comma this Colombia and 1,300. So what are some advantages and disadvantages of this structure? Let's see.
I think accessing the data might be a little more complex.
Okay, sorry, can you say that one more time?
That accessing the data might be a little bit more complex because you have to go into a list and list inside of the list inside of the list.
Okay, yeah, so it definitely adds some complexity here, yeah. So if I wanted to access, let's say, Colombia, the cost for going to Colombia, I have to list, and then the list at 1, and then list at 1 at 1 to get the cost. So one thing that I think would also be a potential issue is that accessing data by an index is fine, but it's, you know, in human terms, what does, you know, list at one mean? It's very easy to get mixed up because that the way you access it isn't connected to what that data means at all. So that's the kind of thing that makes it more difficult to think about. It's higher cognitive load because every time you access something, you have to do this conversion from indexes, and then you have to reference the list. And so what if we combine these two things? What if instead of having a list of lists, we had a list of dictionaries? We have this. Then we could iterate over everything, and then we know that if we're going to access the country, it's going to be country, and the cost is going to be cost. So as we're developing, it's much easier to know what we're dealing with. Okay, so we could do something like this. Are there any advantages or disadvantages of this?
You still have the issue of needing to know what the index for each one is, kind of.
Yeah. So yeah, it depends on how we're going to end up using this, right? But if we know every time that like we want to get we know exactly which country we want to go to, then so first off, if we want to search for a country, I should change this. If you want to search for a country, let's say I want to search for, you know, Colombia. And we have a list. We don't know how long this list is it could have, you know, 100 things or 50 or 5 or whatever. What's the runtime complexity? We haven't really talked about this yet. We'll talk about it next week. What's the runtime complexity of searching for something in a list?
Isn't it linear?
Yeah, it's linear. So we'll talk about this next week, but basically means that if your list has 100 elements, you potentially have to search through 100. You have to check 100 different things. You have to do 100 operations if your list is 100 things long, because you have to check every single element, right? And if your country wasn't in the list at all, you have to check every single element to make sure that that country wasn't in the list. So worst case scenario, every time you search for a country, you have to check every single, so one by one, start at the beginning and go to the end. So that's a downside. So if we don't know what the country is, then we have to do that. So I'm just going to skip ahead and say that we probably will need a list because we don't know what the user is going to put in, and we also have to filter this by cost, and we don't know what that's going to be. So we're gonna have to create this end list. What about the dictionary here? So we know that every element here is going to have a country and a cost. Is there another way, if we know that this data structure, we can expect certain fields to exist? Is there another thing we could use to represent this?
Tuple.
We could use a tuple. Tuple has the issue of now we have to access it by index, so we lose the meaningful name.
I think we could do some sort of destination class so that it also allows for bro first changes. If for example, we want to add the language that you suggested, it might be easier.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So let's create another class that will represent. We'll just call it, we can call it a destination. We can call it anything you want, but class destination info. And how are we going to create this class? Let me pick on some. Sandy, how are we going to create our destination info class?
I would say start with the init.
Okay. So yeah. Init.
Would you put country in there?
Okay, yeah. So every instance of destination info is going to have two properties, right? Going to have a country and a cost, and then we can assign those parameters to instance variables. So self dot country equals country and self dot cost equals cost. Okay, so now instead of having a list of dictionaries, we can have a list of destination info instances. And this gives us more, so this is, an example of like the benefits of using types, for example. So now we have more specific information. We've been more precise in describing what our application is. Okay, and I'm just gonna include this. You definitely don't have to use type annotations, but I'm just gonna make this easier. So country is gonna be a string, and cost, let's say, is gonna be an integer. Okay. All right. So if we want to add type annotations here, we could do this. So the user budget is also going to be an integer. And what data type is country cost data going to be now?
It's an object.
Yeah. What kind of object?
Just a class.
Okay. What class?
A list of destination info.
Exactly. So it's going to be a list of destination info. Right. So this is easier to reason about now. It's a list of destination info. All right, so let's so the last one, let's do user self dot user destination, and this is also going to be a string. So I'm going to remove this for now. Okay, so we can think maybe more about this in a minute. Let's go ahead and start stubbing out some of these methods. We could really start anywhere. Let's start with get user destination. Actually, let's wait on that. What about user budget? How might we implement get user budget?
One of the parameters would be the user budget, self-dot user budget.
Okay. Yeah, so how are we going to be getting information from the user?
Oh, an input.
Okay, good. So let's just imagine that this is going to be a command line application. Just where, you know, a web page, we would get it from a form. But you know, let's say this is a command line application. So we have okay. And then once we have the budget, what are we going to do with it? I'm gonna, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip all of the like validation and logic and stuff. Let's assume happy path.
Need some sort of logic to compare it, the budget with the cost of the country.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So eventually we're gonna have to do that, but just this method's only job is to get the user's budget right now.
So you can just make self.user budget equals a budget.
Yeah. So the
Or
way,
like
yeah.
turn it, depending on how you want to set it up.
Okay, good. So the way we have this is we've set this here, so we can just do something like self.user budget is, and let's convert this into an int budget. Okay, and what is this going to return?
Return the user budget. Or you don't even have to do that.
Right now, it'll return just none, right?
Yes, exactly. So right now it returns none. So let's mark that. So I'm just gonna, this method returns none. If I want to annotate the type of budget, what's the type of budget going to be?
Int.
Okay. It's a
Or it could be a
little-
string.
It'll be.
Yeah.
Actually.
yeah. So when you're getting input from the console, everything's going to be a string.
Could you combine lines 17 and 18 and instead of the variable on 17, could it just be self.user budget equals?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we could definitely combine this, and we could do self.user budget equals int input blah blah blah. So we could definitely do that. So both of them would do the same thing. You know, it's basically just a judgment call. I think one advantage of this is that maybe it's a little easier to understand what's happening. We give variable names to these intermediate steps. So yeah, that's one advantage. A disadvantage is that, you know, this is taking up more room than it has to. So that's basically a judgment call. But yeah, that's a good thing to think about. Okay, so we can have the user budget, and let's see. We should probably also handle this case, right? We have to read in source data. So how are we going to read in the source data? First off, let me create this. And I'm going to grab this stuff. Put that in there. All right. So we have our destinations. How are we going to, so we want to, our goal here is to take this CSV data and turn it into a list of destination info.
So you're gonna have to open the file and then read it.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we're gonna have to interact with this file. So how do we do that? How do you do that easily in Python?
Do it with like a with command.
Okay. So what does with do?
I have no idea. I just know what you use it to do this.
Okay, yeah. Does anyone know what width does?
So
I
I
think it just
think it, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I think like you can really use it to open or create files. So you can, we've just been using it for CSVs, but you can open up or like open any file type really. At least
It-
that's kind of how, and then you just mess with that file when within that width. Um, within the width, I don't know.
Block. Yeah. Okay. Good. So yeah, can you open a file without using a width block?
I'm sure you can, but maybe you can't do all the different things that width allows you to do to the
You
file.
I
can't
think
you can't set it to
doesn't
a variable if you don't use width.
doesn't width kind of tell the program that it's about to do something with it's about to do something associated with that file rather than just open it.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So it width it is a context, called a context manager. And basically, so there are certain patterns that so there's a common pattern, which is I access a resource, I do something with the resource, and then I want to like close or get rid of that resource. So that's a very common pattern. Like I want to, you know, access a file, I want to grab some data from the file, and then I want to close the file. So that pattern is what width is for. And you can make something usable as a context manager by, so let me go into the REPL here. So I'm going to do open. If I can just do this. Let's see. I get an error. Yeah. Let me see. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and open this file here. So now I'm here. So I'm going to do Python. The width, sorry. I don't know what X is going to be. So open destinations.csv. And I'm going to open it in read mode. And if I want to see what kinds of stuff X can do, whatever this is, first off, maybe I'll just print X. Okay, it is an io.text io wrapper. So this is a class, right? So I executed this function and it returns a class or an instance of text io wrapper. What does text io wrapper, what is it and what can it do? We don't know, but we can check by calling dir on X. You can see all of the attributes that it has. So we can see that it has read line, read lines, write lines, write, hell, seekable, blah, blah, blah. It's got all this stuff. And then it's got these dunder methods. These dunder methods are built-in methods. So this is like stuff that Python internally will use. And it's got something called enter, and it's got something called exit. And if you implement, appropriately enter and exit methods, then you can use the context operator. So as I mentioned, the pattern is I access a resource, I do something, and then I close the resource. So that's the enter and exit pattern. So I access a file, I read the file contents, I close the file. So the with operator will basically automatically close the file for you. So in the context of a file, that's what the with. So instead of I have to open the file, I have to attempt, I have to attempt to open the file. That could throw an error, as you just saw in the REPL, right? I tried to access a file that didn't exist, that threw an error. If I open the file and then try to do something with the contents and that throws an error, then it's going to exit and I still have an open file hanging around. So this just makes sure that you're appropriately cleaning up resources. So with open CSV, and I'm going to open it in read mode so we don't overwrite anything accidentally. You can give this an alias. So what is F going to be? What kind of thing is F going to be?
Now just like a pointer.
Yeah, it's
File.
it's going to be this. It's going to be a text IO wrapper. So this as F, it's basically like saying F equals open blah, blah, blah. Okay, and once we have opened the file, what are we gonna do with it?
You want to read it?
Yeah. So we have, this is a specialized file. It's not just any file. We could just use the normal. We could just use normal stuff. We could read it. We could read it in as bytes or whatever, and do whatever processing we want. But fortunately, Python comes with something that can help us read CSV files. So how do we take advantage of that?
You got to import the CSV at the top.
Okay. So do we have to now like download and install CSV?
No,
Why not?
it's I don't know what they're called, like default libraries or default modules.
Yeah, as part of the standard library.
Okay.
So this is, we have, the core of Python. This is what you get basically globally available to you. Things like def, things like, it can cast to an int, input. All that stuff is kind of immediately available to you in the global environment when you're using Python. There's another layer, which is the standard library. So these are more specialized things that you're not going to be using all the time. And if you want to use them, they're available. You just have to explicitly import them to use them. Okay. So now I want to read in this CSV file and I want to create a list of destination info. So I'll just we'll just do this real quick. So reader equals CSV dot. This is just stuff that you would look up. So we'll use the dict reader and dict reader. We'll see if this works. Okay, and I'm going to print reader. All right, so now we want to do some ad hoc tests. We're not writing unit tests right now. We can circle back to that at the end. So I'm going to do if name equals main. And if I want to create an instance of this class and then call the read source data method, how do I do that? Let me pick on someone. Tim.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So I want to create an instance of travel app and call the read source data method. How do I do that?
Just assign a variable travel app 1
Okay.
equals sorry, I'm half in, half out.
That's fine. So I need
And
to
we're trying to,
create an instance of the travel class. So how do you create an instance of a class?
do it called the class.
Yeah. Yep. So travel app. And in this case, at least right now, we're not taking any parameters, so we can just call it with empty parameter list. And then if I want to call the read source data method,
The same thing.
okay, so let's call this, and I'm going to run this Python. Okay, so we have an error here. So let's see, Ricardo, can you tell me what this error is?
It's missing an argument. Is it on the read source data method?
Okay,
Missing the F where it says CSV dot dict
so
reader.
where specifically in read source data is the error occurring?
What was that? I'm sorry.
So where specifically in read source data is the error occurring?
Line 33.
Yeah. Okay, and we get that from the stack trace. So line 33, and it tells us here's where the error is, csv.dictReader. So we're trying to call this, and it's telling us the dictReader init. So we're creating an instance of this dictReader class, right? So when it calls the init, it's missing one positional argument, f. So we can actually see if we can jump in here. So the source code, and we can see, so now we're in the source code here of dictReader. We can look at the init method. So it takes in self, it takes in f, we don't know what that is, and then a bunch of other keyword arguments, which are optional and have defaults. So f, you don't know what f is, it doesn't really tell us the type. But we know that that's what it takes. So we could take a look in here. We'll skip that, and this is going to be the file handle. So we're going to pass in the file, and I'm going to run this again. See what happens, and now we have this dictReader object. So a dictReader object, we don't really know what that is. Is the dictReader object iterable? How might we confirm that?
Yeah, you could try like 4-line in reader print line.
Okay. Yeah.
Iterative for each line.
We
in
could do
the-
that. So we could, ask for forgiveness rather than permission. We could just try and do it. We could also call dir on this and see. So what if this is iterable? What dunder methods are we expecting to see here?
Iter.
Yeah. Iter next. So let's go ahead and print, instead of reader, we'll print line for line reader. Okay, call this again. Let me get rid of that. We can see we get a list of what? What's the type?
A list of dictionaries.
Yeah, a list of dictionaries. All right. So let's try, and before we take a break, so we're going to take a break in a minute, but let's try and finish up this method first. So we now have a list of dictionaries. What we actually want is a list of destination info.
So you're gonna have to never mind.
Any ideas? Any initial thoughts? Doesn't have to be totally.
Yeah, so I think if I remember, you gotta like, you declare your header and that's, oh, I'm sorry, hold on.
Okay,
I-
so okay,
blank.
you're right that dict reader. So let's jump into this again. It does actually take. So this is essentially the column names, field names. So it does take an optional parameter, field names. In this case, it was able to figure it out. So we didn't have to pass it the field names. You can see from the result that it has country and cost. So it's using the first column.
So you're gonna have to iterate through the list in like a for loop. That way you can get the key value pairs of the object, and then you're gonna have to set it to something like the destination info involved in the class, like composition, I guess.
Yeah, so we want to create a list of destination info instances. So we have a list of dictionaries, and these dictionaries have the information that we need in order to create an instance. So we can do destination info, and what are the two parameters? We can do, I'll be explicit here, country equals what? How are we going to access country?
Oh, it would be reader.country.
So so here in this case, what is line representing?
Oh, line represents each object.
Yeah.
So it would be line.country.
Okay. So instead of, this is maybe not, so we used a generic name initially. This is not the clearest. So what would a better variable name for this be?
Dict.
Okay. Could you yeah, so that would be fine. So that tells you the type of thing. Could we be more clear to someone? Let's imagine that, you know, someone else is going to come look at this code and have to work on it later. We want to make it as easy on them as possible.
Country data, maybe.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So country. All right, so to do this, so country data, this is a dictionary, so country. And the second thing we need to create an instance of destination info is cost. And that is going to be country data cost. All right, so I'm gonna print this out and we'll see what we get. Okay, so it looks like we have a bunch of destination info objects. So in Python lingo, object means class instance. We have a bunch of instances. This is not very user friendly though, is it? Is there a way that we can make this a little more user friendly? Well, there is actually. So we can override the string method. So def str. So this is, again, a dunder method. This is a built-in thing. And anytime you try to call, for example, print on something, it's going to call that class's str method, which is basically, how do you want this thing to be represented as a string? So there's a default implementation, which is this gobbledygook, but we can make our own, which is more useful to us. Self. And I'm going to return, so we can return any string we want. And so I'm just going to say destination info. This could really be anything. Country. So and I'll just keep it like this for now, but we can do whatever we want there. And if we now run this, this is actually not going to do that. So print, with the list. I'd have to print this the string representation. We could do this just for the sake of the example. So we call the string method, which print will also implicitly call, but it's inside of this other object. So, okay. All right. So now we have this list of destination info, which is what we need. So what are we going to do with this now?
Appended to your country cost data.
Okay. Yeah, so we can just update that variable. So self dot country cost data equals. We'll just do it all. And I'm gonna format this. So what I did there, I have a formatter install, which you can install an extension, and I did Shift Command P to open up the command palette, and then I did format document, and it will just make it pretty for you. All right. So now I'm gonna call this, and just as a again an ad hoc test. Now I want to check what this is. So let's check that. Travel at one. That's data, and I'm going to print this out. Okay, so that's working. All right, let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll finish this up.
Can I ask you a really quick question about the notation that you use to create the list of destination info?
Sure.
So you didn't have to do like an append because you are essentially you have this for loop inside of the list that's going to be, it's almost like it's appending internally. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what is this structure called in Python?
List comprehension.
Yeah. So this is a list comprehension. So it's going to create a new list. So yeah, it's essentially creating a list and appending each
Okay.
one of these things for every every thing in this reader. So we definitely could have done so. The other more, let's say, generic pattern is create an empty list, loop over the list, and then append each of those to that list, and then do something with that list. So this is just a more concise way of doing that.
Got it. Thank you so much.
All right. All right, so let's finish this up. So we've got a travel app now, and we've got implementations for get user budget and read source data. So I think the next thing to tackle would be get possible destinations based on the budget. So we have we can get the user budget, and we have all the possible destinations they can have. So how are we going to implement this?
You got to compare user budget to the cost of and the country cost data.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So what do we want? What do we want to return from this?
It'd be a list of the possible countries.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a couple options here. So what kind of operation do we are we doing here?
Guess you'd be returning a condition.
So we could so let's say that here is all of our we'll just go here. So let's say the user has a budget of $1,200. So if we have a list of destination info with these three in it, and the user has a budget of 1,200, then what do we have now?
Would you just want to have a list of anything that is less than or equal to the user's budget and then return that? Or
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
yeah. So I'm trying to get at filter. So we have a list of destination info with all the possible destinations. We now are going to restrict that list. So one thing we could do is return also a list of destination info, but a filtered list of destination info.
Because a filter returns a boolean, right?
A
Or
filter
not
doesn't-
returns a boolean, but it returns a condition.
so it doesn't return. So the filter will return a list. But what do you pass to filter? So filter takes two parameters. What are the two parameters?
Oh, it's gonna be the. Actually, never mind.
So filter takes a function, and it also takes an iterable, basically a list. So it takes a function and a list. And what is the shape, or what is the signature of the function that you pass to filter? So this is basically what you were getting at. So this kind of function is called a predicate. So a predicate function is something that returns a Boolean, basically. So the function that you pass the filter is going to take a parameter which represents the current item in the list, and it's going to return a Boolean. So you're going to do some test on each item in the list and return either true or false. If it's true, you're going to keep it. If it's false, you're going to get rid of it. Okay, so if we know that, we're gonna have to pass filter two things. One of them is going to be a function. So I'm just gonna write lambda. It's gonna take one parameter, which is going to be the first. So if we're gonna give it a list of destination info, so and we're gonna do something. Just return true for now. And the second parameter is going to be the list of destination info. And I'm going to return this. And I need to cast it to a list. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just to test this again. We will talk about writing tests in a second, but just as an ad hoc test. So I'm going to create an instance of travel app, and to skip, to cut to the chase, I'm going to create it with, or I'm going to assign a user budget, and then I'm going to call this read source data. So travel app 1.user user budget equals, let's say, 1200. Travel F1, and I'm going to call the read source data. And once I have that, now I'm going to call get possible destinations based on budget. I'm going to print that out. So what am I expecting to see in this case? If I give it $1,200, what am I expecting to see there?
Just Japan.
Yeah, so I'm going to see just one thing. So let's see if that works. So I gave it a dummy placeholder function that returns true. So this is going to return the whole list. So how do we make this behave?
You gotta add the conditions where true is.
Yeah. So what's the test that we want to do here?
If the country cost data dot country is less than or equal to the budget.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we
Let's
want
do
to
a
test.
ternary here.
Yeah, so yeah, we could do a ternary. So what are the two values we want to compare? We want to compare whatever the user's budget is. So we're gonna have to do something with that. And then we're also gonna do something with what?
The country cost data country. Budget.
Yes. Yeah.
Cost. My bad.
So inside of this lambda, where do we have access to that information? What is this?
That would be each object in the country cost data, right?
Yes, and what is each object in self.country cost data?
The destination info class.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is an instance of destination info. And what property does an instance of destination info have that we care about?
Cost.
Exactly. So we have the user budget, and then we also have dest info dot cost. And what do we want to do here?
Less than or equal to.
Okay, so less than or equal to. So because this returns a Boolean, we could use it here. We could also be explicit and say if blah 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 return true, else return false, but that's not really necessary. So we could do like a ternary expression there, but this will also work. All right, so let's see if this works. Okay, so now we have an error. So I'm gonna pick on, let's see, Taufik. Can you tell me about this error? What's happening?
Line 26.
Okay, good. So it's happening on line 26. And so line 26 is right here. So there's a problem with the lambda. And the specific error here is a type error. And so what is it trying to do?
I mean, it's trying to compare something, the data type that are not the same in integer and string.
Exactly. So what type is self.userbudget?
I think that's integer.
Okay. So we're pretty sure that it's an integer. I can see, for example, here that we're explicitly casting it to an integer. What about destination info.cost?
That is string.
Yeah, it's supposed to be an integer, and we kind of marked it as being an integer. So
Right.
it's supposed to be an integer. Why is it not an integer?
Let me see that one.
Where would we, so here's where we're creating instances of destination info.
I think from the source file.
Okay. So we're reading in this source file, the CSV file. These look like, I mean, they look like integers.
Right.
So the problem is that anytime it's like reading console input, when you read from a file like this, everything is a string. So when we create the instance of destination info based on the contents of the file, this stuff is strings. It's all going to be strings, just like input. So we had this explicitly cast to an integer here because this is going to be a string. So we're going to have to do the same thing here. So we can cast this to an int. Again, we're not going to do error checking for the sake of time. So now I'm going to run this. And we have, interestingly, two things. Okay. So does anyone have any ideas as to why we have two things?
Would it be that the function is returning both the country and the cost?
Okay, good. So let's take, so this is what type is this function returning?
It's either going to be a list or a tuple because it's 2 items.
Okay, so it's a list of what?
It would be a list of whatever meets the filter that we've set, the parameter. So, i.e., the country and cost that meet the user's budget.
Okay, so it's going to be a list of destination info. So list destination info. We can mark that here. So this is the return value of this. So we can expect this. We should. This is not really enforced by the compiler. There's other things we could do, but it's fine. So this is for our benefit. So we're expecting this to be a list of destination info. So if this is going to return me a list of destination info, I should be able to check that. So I'm just going to do print str dest for dest in dest. And
It's
I'm
because
gonna, yeah, question?
it's because our comparison operator is backwards.
Yeah. Well, let's just confirm that real quick. So our budget was 1,200, and we're expecting to only have Japan, but instead we have the opposite. We have France and Colombia. Why do we have France and Colombia? Because we're checking if the cost is greater than the budget. So we just have to switch that. Okay, so now we're just getting Japan, which is what we expect. Okay, so let's implement this one now. So get user destination. So user has entered, we have the list of all possible destinations. The user has entered their budget. And now we can get this filtered list. So we could display the available options and then let the user pick one.
So you could just print that list that we just had and then just ask them for an input
Okay,
that they
Yeah.
want.
so let me just. I'm just gonna modify this. So I will just, let's say, we'll just print out the country name. And then we'll do print. Let's do. Yes, for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and do this quickly. And this will be. Again, not going to do error checking. We'll do this on one line just for the sake of the variation. And now I'm going to format it. Shift Command P, make it easier to read. Okay. So now I'm going to run all this stuff. Ad hoc test here. And now I'm going to call get user destination. So travel app one. Get destination. If I run this, choose one of Japan. Okay, so Japan, and that should return Japan. All right. So now for display confirmation message. I'll just do this quick. So print, you have chosen self dot user destination. All right, so ad hoc test again. One dot. So I'm going to run this again. Japan. You've chosen Japan. So there's other, tests we probably want to test to make sure that the destination is actually a possible one, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to skip that for now. Okay. Any general questions about this? All right. Let's see if we can write some tests. So I'm not going to write tests for everything, but we'll focus on a couple key areas of test. So I'm going to do all the boilerplate. Actually, maybe let me ask ChatGPT. Give me some boilerplate here. Here. All right, so ChatGPT. can you give me the boilerplate for Python unit test? All right, cool. So I'm going to copy this and paste that in. Okay. All right. So boilerplate here, unit test, and then class. So let's rename this to test. Just get rid of that. And we don't need to do tear down, should be fine. We could do setup. So what is setup for?
Instantiating your object.
Yeah. Yep. So if, for example, anything that you want to have available to you before you run a given test, you can create here. So let's say we want to have an instance of the travel app. So how am I going to go about setting this up? So I've got my code right here.
Need to import.
Yep. Good. So I have to import the actual
Class.
code I want tested. So from travel app, import app. Self that a travel app. Okay. So now I have an instance. Every time I run a test, I have an instance of travel app available to me. So what do I want to test first? Well, let's not test everything. So let's just make sure we want to test the basic logic. Like, we'll just write tests for this right now. So get possible destinations based on budget.
Will you need to import destination info class as well, or will it just go back into the other file when it's running?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's see how far we can get without doing that. So we want to create an instance of travel app. And we want to test, let's say basically we want to hard code this test. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that basically. So we have access to this before this method runs. So self.ta.user budget equals 1200. And then self.ta.read source data. And then how are we going to go about this? So if we look at get user destination, can we run this as an independent unit test?
Yeah, so what I've been doing, and I'm sure this is not ideal, but you pass in the input variable, but like shoot, hold on, how do I explain this? In my function, I do, you know what? I forget. I'm gonna have to look at my code. I've done this before though, with inputs on unit tests.
Okay.
Yeah, how? Shoot.
Yeah, if you think of it, let me know. So there's a couple ways to handle it. One, I showed you last week, which is called dependency injection. The other way, which maybe what you were doing, is called monkey patching. But we can, so this is maybe an indication that we should change the implementation here, but let's pass over that for now. For now, we can just hard code user destination. It's one of the nice things about classes. So self.ta.user destination equals Japan, for example. And then this get possible destinations based on budget. Actually, we don't need to do that even right now. So we want to test that this actually returns. Let's just do a simple test. So self dot assert equal, and let's do so just a pretty generic test here. So we want to make sure that there's only one destination available. All right, so I'm going to run this now. Python -m unit test. And this test passes. So we could have another, another test and blah, 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 blah. So let's say we want to, we wanted to test this. So one thing we could do is, let's write another test. Get user so self.ta. Get user destination. So this is also dependent on calling this. So we've got some complex dependencies now, right? So this is not really an independent function anymore. It kind of depends on something else, which depends on having these other things. This is again, like, maybe not the best design, but we'll go with it for now. So these are things you could think about. Just one reason why unit testing is good, forces you to look at your code from a different perspective. Okay, so we've got a user budget and we've got access to the source data, and now we want to see what the user destination is. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And now we're out of automatability land. So someone has to manually intervene in this test in order to run. So I can even do something like test equals and then self.assert equal test Japan. And we're actually not returning this. So I would have to run this. And then instead of test, I would do self.user, what is this? User destination. Run that again. Japan. Did I just misspell that? Whoops. Okay, so what's my mistake here? So what's the error? Yeah, exactly. So can you just walk me through reading the error?
So the test travel app, you haven't, since it's
so where is the error occurring first?
on line 20 in the
Yeah,
unit
okay.
test.
So it's on line 20. And what is the error?
No attribute to user destination
Yeah. No attribute on what?
on the test travel app.
Yeah. Which is this. But I'm not accessing the travel app. I'm accessing, or, test travel app. I'm accessing travel app, right?
So
Every
self
time
in
you
this
call
instance
self, it
is the
points
Python.
at test travel app.
Yeah, exactly. So inside of this test, self is test travel app. What I did, as someone pointed out, is TA. So I was accessing the test class rather than the thing that I was testing. So Japan, and that test passes, but this is not a good test, right? Because we're doing this. So one thing I could try doing is input equals lambda x. So let's see if this works. Let's see. Where do I have to? I might have to do this up here. And do very. This might not work in Python. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So I would have to, let's see. Let me try travel app dot. Try that. So there's a way to do this slightly more respectably. Okay, so let me try this. Okay, so this test now passes. And if I change this to Columbia, this test will fail. So this is called monkey patching. Maybe not the best idea. The name might tell you that this is maybe not the best idea. So what did I, does anyone know what I did here?
Did you override the input?
Yeah, so I have this, so we have a problem, which is that I want to run a unit test, but that unit test is calling this, which calls the built-in input, which requires, interaction on the console, which we don't want. So we want to get rid of this. So what I did is I overrode monkey patch basically. So I overrode the built-in input function. So this, like the actual Python input function is now shadowed by this. I kind of redefined the built-in function. So it just does this. But that's, so this is one thing you can do when you're unit testing things, but not really a good idea.
Would that override the budget input in line 20?
Yes. Yeah, it would override it. It would override it everywhere.
Okay. So if you try to test that, it would fail.
Yeah, I might be able to be more specific and only override it on this test. and then I could write another test. Let's do test self.ta get user budget. And this is going to, call it. So self.assert equal self.ta.user budget. Let's just say 100. So we should be able to override this specifically here. So first off, let me comment this out and put it back up here as a global. And if I run this, it should fail. So it's actually throwing an error because it's trying to cast Japan to an int. So I can remove that, put it back here, and this test will run, but it should interrupt me to ask for the budget, which I don't want. I can also overwrite it just in that test and say 100. See that? Interesting.
You need to override it before you call get user budget.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Okay, so that passes, and if I pass it a different value, it should fail the unit test. So you could do something like that. Again, not really good, but you should do a more robust solution is to do something like dependency injection, which I showed before. So you would pass in the dependency. So input func, and you could default it to input. And then you now have that level of indirection. And we don't have to do this anymore. Except when we call get user budget now, we'll pass in that function. So lambda x 100. And it works the same way. We don't have to monkey patch, and this is also more flexible.
Why do you, on line 25 of the test file, why do you have to use the lambda function there?
On 25 of the test file, you don't have to actually. So if we didn't want to do this, we could actually just define another function. You can do it up here. Def return 100, and that will take a parameter we don't care about and return 100. And then instead of this, pass in return 100. Should work exactly the same.
Could you just pass in 100?
So why could you not do that? So here is the source code. So why could you not just pass in 100?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so input func. So what happens? I'm going to go to a Python interpreter here. So it's going to return 100. So if I do 100, and if I try to call 100 with, give budget, what's going to happen? stir object is not callable. So let's try passing in 100. Stir object is not callable. So this is something which is going to get called. So it needs to be callable, which basically just means it needs to be a function.
Gotcha.
So I think this is probably, since it's so simple and it's only used here, I think a lambda is probably a good thing to do here, but you can always, you never have to use a lambda. You can always just define a regular function. Okay. All right, we'll leave it at that. So yeah, we'll take a break and then we'll come back in your groups. I think, yeah, you guys are in like set groups now, right? Okay, and you guys know who's in what group. So let's look at the challenge. So there's a couple. The first one will be a group challenge, and I will copy the code that we did and I'll update this, so don't start on this yet. So you guys are gonna further modify travel destinations to make it more flexible so that it will be able to read multiple file formats, not just CSVs. And then after that, you can work individually or however you like on school interface 1, which will be another OOP challenge. So it's like command line and OOP stuff. Okay. Any questions about anything?